Welcome to Natural Resources University. This week's episode features Fire University, hosted by Marcus Lashley.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Fire University. Today we're going to do things a little bit differently. If you've been listening to the podcast or you follow us on social media, you probably remember the recent free prescribed fire training that we put out online. If you aren't familiar with it or you forgot about it or failed to take it, we have the link in the show notes so you can go there if you want to take it to learn more about application of fire. But as part of that course, we had a panel of experts, and we allowed the first cohort of students to ask those experts questions, either that arose in the course or either just questions that people had about applying fire on their own land. So we thought you would benefit from hearing those questions and hearing the experts from all around the Southeast answer them. So we hope you enjoy that. Thanks for listening. Again, the link is in the show notes. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. So I'm not able to see everyone in the screen, but let's see if I can change that real quick. I'll just go ahead and ask now that each of the panelists introduce yourselves. So just give us a couple of minutes to tell us about yourselves, and I'll just start in the order that you're listed on here. So Kevin Robertson, do you want to start, please?
I'm Kevin Robertson, the fire ecology research scientist at Tall Timbers Research Station. I study plant communities and their response to different fire regimes and lots of different aspects having to do with fire science, from emissions to remote sensing and all those kinds of things, focused mostly on upland pine savanna habitats.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Dave Coyle.
Hey everyone, Dave Coyle, Clemson University. I'm an assistant professor and state extension specialist with for forest health and invasive species. So I cover pretty much all the bugs, fungus, and invasive plants that affect, everything from single trees to forest stands. So pretty broad range, and happy to be here. Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to do this, all of you. Craig.
Good afternoon. I'm Craig Harper, professor of wildlife management and the extension wildlife specialist at the University of Tennessee. And my research interests, of course, include fire effects on wildlife, and in particular, fire effects on white-tailed deer and wild turkeys and bobwhite. And we've done a considerable amount of work with fire effects in upland hardwoods. That's typically what we specialize in here, as well as fire effects in early successional communities.
Thank you. John Weir.
Yeah, my name is John Weir from Oklahoma State University here in Oklahoma. I'm an associate extension specialist. I do my extension work with prescribed burn associations, training with landowners as well as agency folks throughout Oklahoma, the Southern Great Plains, wherever people want to come listen to me talk nonsense about. And I do turtle research with Craig Harper as well. He didn't mention the great turtle work and our tortoise as we go. But anyway, I also, again, teach prescribed fire courses and do research in fire effects on plant communities, livestock, wildlife, anything and everything we can do with that. So glad to see everyone here. A lot of familiar faces and stuff. Glad to see everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Morgan Treadwell.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Morgan Treadwell. I'm a associate professor in the Rangeland Wildlife and Fisheries Management Department with Texas A&M University. But more importantly, I'm also an extension range specialist based out of San Angelo, Texas. So think Texas, think West Texas, and, remove any other preconceived notions that you had about us. I work a lot with prescribed burn associations. I work a lot with just private landowners who are interested in fire. I tried to get them to catch that spark, so to speak. I've been developing quite a few online materials coming out of COVID for folks to maintain continuing fire training credits for their certified license from Texas Department of Agriculture. And then also just developing online courses for folks who are interested in taking an online burn school. So I'm really excited to see this course and see all the great attention it's getting. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, well, we can open it up, the floor to the participants, and I'll ask you again, if you have any questions. We have the initial session where you type those in. So if you have questions for any of the panelists, please type those in now. And you can specify if there's someone in particular you'd like to ask a question.
Oops, I meant to just type that to Mary now, but I just asked, I think we might actually have a small enough group potentially that if folks feel comfortable just asking their questions on video, that we could allow folks to go ahead and unmute themselves and turn their cameras on if they want. So yeah, Mary Nell said that folks can do that. So if anybody does feel comfortable in doing that, or if not, feel free to put it into the chat as well. I don't think we have an anonymous feature, but if for whatever reason somebody wants to ask an anonymous question, then you could just privately chat it to either Marcus or myself, and then we could ask it on your behalf as well as another option.
I have an anonymous question for Craig.
It wouldn't be the first, Marcus.
Probably not the last either. Okay, well, we definitely have some questions, so we can start so I could go ahead and start. One of the things that we were really interested in from each of the panelists, so if one of you would like to start, that would be great. In your experience working, particularly with extension agents, but just in extension with wild and fire, given your expertise, what are some really maybe 2 or 3 or 4 very important things for people to think about or consider when they're thinking about wild and fire? So I guess we could start with Kevin again, if you want to start, Kevin.
That's a pretty broad question. Are you talking to people who are just getting into wild and fire to start with, or just even broader than that?
Yeah, what things do you think are really important?
Well, having some kind of a management objective for prescribed burning is the first thing. Where you're trying to get to, and where's your starting place. Is it a kind of habitat that fire was in historically, that it's going to have the kinds of plants and the fuel to even be able to burn to begin with? Where do you want it to go? Do you think you can get there from here, given what you've got? And that's kind of where to start is having an idea in your mind of what do you want to accomplish with fire, because there are lots of different things, from wildlife to biodiversity to reducing competition for forestry to reducing fuels for hazard reduction, et cetera.
Dave, you want to answer the same question?
Yeah, there's 3 main questions that I think, most extension folks get asked in terms of fire and forest pests, right? The first one, and Marcus, you and I talked about this at length, is can I use fire to control invasive plants, right? Long story short, no, not really. That's why they're invasive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be invasive. And it certainly depends on the particular plant. In a lot of cases, we don't really know sort of if seeds can be killed, or sometimes those really young seedlings can be killed if burn comes in at the right time. But especially with woody stuff, once it's got a woody stem, it's probably just going to resprout. And that goes for everything from privet to calorie repair to all sorts of stuff. That's the reason it's invasive, right? So when people say, can I just burn my stand and get rid of the invasives? Probably not. But what you will be able to do is top kill a lot of that stuff. And then that's going to make it a lot easier to come in afterwards with herbicide and knock it out that way. So that's probably the first point, is just there's no silver bullet for invasive weeds, especially, right? That's why they're there. The next one is, in terms of pine, for southern pine beetle, will burning help or hinder for southern pine beetle? And as long as you're not torching those things, a prescribed fire is great for southern pine beetle. A big way we can control SPB and prevent those outbreaks is keeping a fairly open understory. Pine beetles work by they get in there, and then they, once they get in a tree, they're emitting pheromones, those odors. And as long as, the less stuff you have in there, the less those pheromones are going to hang around and attract other beetles. So that includes keeping it thinned at the right, at the right density, but also just burning and getting rid of a lot of that understory. And then alongside of that, will a fire lead to other bark beetles? And I guess the answer there is, yeah, maybe, if it's too hot, right? Because a lot of those things are coming in just as a stress response. Ips bark beetles are the ones, we have in pine down here, especially in the southeast. And yeah, if you torch those trees too hot, you're going to get ips, you're going to get turpentine beetles. And, fire is not a perfect thing. You might nip a tree or lose a tree here and there, but, I would strongly argue that the overall benefit of a prescribed fire far outweighs not doing it just because you might lose a tree here and there. Probably the three big ones from my perspective.
Awesome. Thank you. Craig?
Well, as Kevin said, it's a broad question, but and the responses obviously are thus far have been great, but I'll get a little more basic. And number one, in working with extension agents, the number one thing that most need to do is to learn a little more about fire, about how to implement prescribed fire. And then, of course, consider closely your objectives, as Kevin mentioned, and also develop relationships with others who have experience with prescribed fire. And each state is a little different, but of course, you've got to be familiar with the laws and regulations surrounding prescribed fire, if, where, and when you need burn permits, who you need to call, that kind of thing. And oftentimes your relationships with a volunteer fire department that is close by, if you're routinely burning on a particular property, can be very important. So your knowledge of fire and your knowledge of how to implement fire and the logistics and who to call and permits, that's number one and obviously basic. Then from a wildlife standpoint, as Kevin mentioned, from a plant side, it's also very, very true from the wildlife side. Why are you burning? And the one word you should not mention is wildlife. That's totally ambiguous. Is that for oven birds or copperheads or deer or squirrels? All of those are wildlife. And so you've got to identify specifically which species that you're interested in, which are the focal species. And then the next step is learn or know something about the biology of those focal species. And so how can fire help those individual species? Because fire does different things for different wildlife species, and fire should be implemented differently according to which species you're trying to manage. And so oftentimes you hear, fire is good for wildlife, so we'll burn. Well, that's, again, you've got to be much, much more specific than that to really do a good job in reaching your goals and objectives.
Great. John?
Yeah, I've got about four things that I always try to deal. The first two things that I always see with educators or landowners and new people to fire is number one, you've got to educate them. And they've got to understand the difference between wildfire and prescribed fire, because everybody has this preconceived notion that all fires behave like a wildfire, and they think they think they're going to strike a match and poof, no eyebrows. It's going to burn the world down. It's going to look like a nuclear holocaust. Every tree is going to go up. It's going to be a total crown fire, wall to wall. And, we know, again, under the conditions that we burn under, what'll burn and what won't burn. And so to me, that's one of the biggest things, because we get people that want to burn and then they're upset with the fire because it didn't make a moonscape out of the place. They want it moonscape down. Because, we're just, Morgan and I, I'll speak for Morgan just a little bit. We're a little different because what we see, like I see in the background, a bunch of y'all's pictures behind your faces is a bunch of tall brush that we got to get rid of. And so, because you got to remember, prescribed fires prevents forests. And that's Morgan and I's motto, because prairies are not forests. And so that's what a lot of people are trying to, that we work with are trying to do. And they think that they can just nuke everything down. And they've got to understand that because the media, again, they portray every fire on TV a wildfire. And that's what most everybody thinks every fire is. So educating everyone that the fire is not, number one, it's not going to burn the whole county down when we set it, because we set it under specific conditions and things that we do. And secondly, that misconception that it's not going to burn everything up like they want it to possibly, they got to understand, start learning a little bit about fire effects, then that's their next thing is, well, I want to kill all this stuff. And well, we know that fire doesn't kill all this stuff. Most everything resprouts, very few, we can change structure of habitat and things like that. And so educating them on that. But then, the next biggest thing is getting them to use fire and think about fire. And probably one of the best tools that I have found to do that with is historical photographs. I've gone back, looked at a lot of historical photographs that show a lot of the regions, especially in Oklahoma, again, where I work at. And, from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and show those pictures to people. And, the landscape looks totally different than it does now. And that changes everybody's mindset that, hey, we need to have fire out here, because you look at this thing, a lot of it is treeless prairie in our region, and they look at it and it's like, holy smokes, now we got trees popping up everywhere, and this doesn't look like that. And, that's the way Grandpa always described it. And then even, in the forested regions of eastern Oklahoma, we have historical photographs that show a more open, forest setting and things like that. And people say, yeah, I want that. And see that. And so I think, using that kind of stuff is a big part to help educate people of the importance of fire, that it was important historically, what things can look like, what things can be like with fire. Again, their specific piece of land, fire may not be the single thing that we can get it back with. It may be so far gone, we got to do some kind of mechanical treatment, or we got to do chemical, or a combination of all three. We've got to get all of it in there. So that's the details that you got to work out later. But first, you got to get them to understand that it's not a wildfire. It's not going to moonscape everything, and under the conditions that we burn under.
Thanks. Actually, before we move on to Morgan, we had a question come in that I think is related here. So I'll go ahead and read that off. And John, you or anybody else on the panel that would like to answer, feel free to jump in. But I think it's a great question. It's from Alan Thornton. What are ways to overcome public perceptions and fears of prescribed burning, whether it's on private land, national or state forests? Are there any educational resources to point the public to, or strategies?
I don't think there's one silver bullet that everybody wants. I think you have to adjust your story to who you're talking to. To me, that's the biggest key of who you're talking to, whether it's a group of third graders, or it's a county cattlemen's association. So I talk about the benefits of fire with livestock production. I'm not going to talk about songbirds and butterflies, but then when I go talk to the garden club, I'm going to talk about wildflowers and butterflies, and we're not going to talk about cattle production. You got to, a lot of times we try to can one speech and it doesn't work. You got to identify with who you're talking with and what group to get that benefit. as you can. That's what I've seen seems to work for me.
I'll chime in on that real quickly, Marcus. One of the things that we have used here is demonstration areas and having those open and available to the public. And we have signage up where they can see areas that have been burned every year, every 2 years, in the dormant season, in the growing season, et cetera. And we have, for example, a fire trail set up where they can walk through and see. And it doesn't get that much visitation by the public at large. It does some, but it does attract a lot of educational groups, whether that be college, whether that be state forestry, U.S. Forest Service, NRCS, state wildlife agencies, and also grade school groups. So a lot of people will visit these areas, especially in their educational program, and slowly that helps people see, oh wow, this is pretty, or this is nice. This is what this is for. This is why they did it. There's information on the signs, and then of course when there's an educational tour, somebody there to help explain things, and I think that goes a long way when you can stand on the ground and see it versus just reading about it or viewing it on YouTube.
And I think, I was going to say, building on what Craig just said, I think if you've got places like that where you can show it, reach out to media, right? Because you can get a lot of eyes on a 6 o'clock news segment versus just having some stuff there for people to see when they want to, right? I think one of the biggest, I don't know if it's a challenge, but something that most extension people, I would argue, should do is figure out who the friendly media are, who the ones that are going to be honest with you, and involve them in stuff like this. And they're always looking for good stories. And when it's fire season, they love to go a lot of new eyes that you wouldn't reach otherwise by getting some stuff.
We're having some issues with the internet. Well, I think Dave was making a great point, but I can't hear him. So I guess until he comes back, Morgan, do you want to talk a little bit about what you think is really important?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and steal Dave's thunder, I guess, so to speak. Yeah, I'm right there with John. The reasons why we burn out here are very different than the reasons that y'all have behind you in your backgrounds. But I think most importantly, fire is still a process. It's still a part of the system. We need it just as much as y'all need it. And many species depend on it. And as our Texas landscape becomes more and more fragmented from urbanization and from folks moving out to the country, and there's 10-acre hobby ranches going up where hardcore rangeland, big ranches used to be, we need to have that discussion more and more. It's not how you live with fire, it's how fire is going to live with you and in your backyard. And definitely we've seen that in Eastland counties and in Northeast Texas this year already. So I think there's when I talk to my landowners, there's lots of ways to burn, and there's lots of people to help get fire on the ground. And all of that is dependent and variable with that person's comfort zone. If sometimes, you come across the landowner who understands the reasons and the processes behind burning, but they are scared crazy about it. They don't want to even be in the same county as that fire. There's ways to still get that fire done if it still intimidates you to that degree. And same for an agent. If you're looking to experience fire, boy, there are so many people in this state, in this region, in this area that you can just go learn from. And because I guarantee you, the more fire you are around, the more comfortable you feel. And it doesn't always feel like a stressful moment. There's so much stress associated with fire that I wish I could just calm everyone down, and that they could smoke that, fill that smoke up like a cleanse almost. It should give you peace when you see fire on the horizon or smoke on the horizon instead of just the opposite. And that's also the message that I preach to landowners. Wildfire can be a super scary thing, but the more we talk about fire's role in these systems, I think the more comfortable people will get with future fire that is purposely being placed on the ground in a very safe and effective manner. Another point that I always try to hit on is fireworks with other processes. Just because you graze or just because you have a stalker operation doesn't mean you have to exclude fire. It works synergistically with all of these processes that have shaped rangelands, that have shaped the most productive systems in this country for years. And we need to elevate that up from not just landowners, but to our policies as well. If you take a look at NRCS practice policy right now, grazing is separated from fire, from prescribed fire. And that's crazy in my mind. If you're resting and completely deferring a pasture from grazing, that pasture should be primed and queued up for your next prescribed burn. And you're rotating through your pastures just like you would rotate with a grazing system or a grazing operation. So I think fire works very synergistically with other processes. It doesn't just have to be cattle grazing, it's goats, it's sheep, it's multi-species grazing. And when you start talking about all these buzzwords like sustainability, diversity, the regenerative soil health movement, fire fits right there with all of it. And you can't have one without the other. And we try to separate it. We try to keep it in its own silos. But if we're really taking this on as a systems approach, interested in building resilient and resistant landscapes to woody brush encroachment, to overall productivity, to species diversity, we got to start looking at that big picture. And fire is the core of that in all of these systems.
Great, I appreciate that.
We'll save fire frequency for another discussion too, Marcus.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, you're welcome to type those in, or if you'd like to unmute and ask a question, please feel free to do that. Another follow-up question, I guess, and it could be posed to anyone who would like to jump in on it from the panel. Have you had some examples in your own programming that have been one of the more successful in getting people to adopt fire on their property? So what type of programming has been most effective that you've worked with?
I'll take a stab at that. It's hands-on. I don't care if you're in a suit and tie. I don't care if you're wearing Nomex or if you're in blue jeans or boots or smoke jumper boots, white boots. I don't care. You get out there and feel that fire and experience that fire, and it will completely change your perception of it. Growing season fires, people do not understand what growing season fires are like unless they experience it. And when they experience it, they don't want to do anything else but that. We build so many misconceptions up in our mind that we think we know what we're getting into, and we don't. I had a growing season prescribed fire workshop, and I had a landowner tell me he did not think that much prickly pear, which is somewhat of an invasive species out here for us, would succumb into it because he thought the grass was too green to burn. And the exact opposite just happened. Now, if he hadn't seen that with his own two eyes, if he saw it on a YouTube video or on a Facebook post, he would have made up again his own misconceptions about it. But he sat there, he experienced it, he watched the fire move through it, watched the tame behavior, watched it cook, and it changed his perception immediately. The same with county officials, county judges, county commissioners. When they experience a prescribed fire, they understand that it's not wildfire, that it's totally different. And the people that are lighting that match or that torch and taking on the liability of it are way more greater stewards of this resource than anybody else in this area. So I think there's another level of respect that changes hands when people can experience a safe, effective, and really game-changing type fire situations. So we don't do it enough as extension folks. We're already spread way too thin when it comes to field days. But gosh, the more we could have, if people would just open up their gates on the day of fires and say, "Come one, come all," I think we'd be having a lot different reception of fire in our cultures.
Marcus, you asked about our programming, and that's an interesting word to use. And as such, I would agree with Morgan in that hands-on is the best, beyond reading about it or looking at a video. But for extension programming, like a workshop or a field day or whatever, in most areas it's difficult because you have to plan ahead, and the chances of, the burn weather on that day being suitable to burn, it's at best a coin flip, and usually a lot worse. But we have done a lot of that, and we have been successful in actually having burns during those workshops. And a couple of little tidbits that I will throw out that we've used to hit the weather right to burn in hardwoods is going to be really, really chancy in setting that up for a field day. Obviously, it's much easier if you're going to show some burning techniques or whatever, and you're doing so in early successional communities, old fields, et cetera. And so something that we do ahead of time, 3 to 4 weeks, we will go and spray an area in the field. And so that almost guarantees, unless it's actually raining, we're going to be able to burn something. So we are at least able to show them some firing techniques, probably a little bit about fire behavior, et cetera. So coupling herbicide applications, a few weeks prior to the workshop, that helps a lot. The other thing is, of course, people are and should be nervous about using fire. And I talk to a lot of groups, and the vast majority are interested in, shooting deer and turkeys. And for example, I will ask them that they have this impression that they've got to burn all their wood or burn all their fields at one time. And one of the things I'll ask them is, how many of you plant food plots? And, that'll be the majority of them usually. And I'll ask them, okay, what's the smallest food plot that you ever killed a deer on? And so now they start, competing with each other, an acre, a half acre, a quarter of an acre and whatnot. And so I'll say, well, why can't you burn a quarter of an acre? You don't have to burn all of your woods. And in starting off, I think that's really good when they learn, oh, I can take a backpack blower and I can blow a fire break that's, might be, 20 yards by 20 yards or whatever, to burn an area that size. And I tell them, just start small, because as someone mentioned, and rightfully so, they're very nervous and anxious about beginning use with fire, and they should be. But as they start small and begin to learn, and as I mentioned earlier, get some people with you who have experience with fire, that's really been helpful for us.
Great, thanks. So I guess I can follow up on that as well. In terms of the barriers, there's definitely some apprehension, especially with folks starting to burn. And Craig, you just named one way that you try to address one of those barriers, but I was curious, how often do you include the risks associated with burning in your programming? I mean, are you forthcoming and immediately talk about that, or do you tend to talk about the positive effects? That's for anybody on the panel. If you're asking me, yes, I try. For me personally, of course, I'm forthright and honest, but at the same time, I've been to a lot of workshops where the person giving the information on liability and risk, I mean, they just blow it out the top. And literally, I've seen people get up and walk out of the room saying, well, I'm not doing that. You literally can scare people to death in that there's no way they're going to touch it. So I think that's an important issue to talk about, but, couch that in such a way, and I tell them, the first time you ever drive a car or get on a tractor or do lots of things can be very dangerous. You just need to learn something about whatever you're about to get into and use the appropriate amount of caution. And so explaining that in such a way, I think it helps ease people's fear a little bit, but also a healthy dose of realism and understanding, yeah, this can be dangerous is important.
Yeah, I bring it up all the time. Again, liability is one of my pet peeves because that's if you look at all the surveys that's been done for the last 4 decades on prescribed fire, fear of liability is the number one reason most people don't burn. So how do you overcome that? And so, showing people, telling people about fire, but also looking at the hard facts about what is the liability and what is the risk out there, and try to bring it down to a level that they can understand. And that's exactly one of the best things to do, is to show people that, that it's not any more risk. It's kind of like this. One of the things we tried to work on doing a study, but we had a hard time trying to figure it out. Looking at what's the difference between the number of lawsuits between prescribed fire and herbicide application. I guarantee you there's a whole lot more money changes hands with herbicide application than there is fire. And we could even do it on an acre per acre basis. But trying to get all the actual facts in the court cases is kind of tough. But bringing it into that, just like what Craig said, that's one of the things, one of my big examples I use is I ask everybody in the audience, I said, so how many of y'all have never been in a car wreck? And you'll usually in a group of 30 people, there'll be 1 or 2 people that's never been in a car accident. And then you ask the other people, well, why do you drive? Really truly, why do you drive? You've been in a wreck, it's dangerous. So why do you do it? And it's a perceived versus an actual risk. And prescribed fire is always a perceived risk that people perceive that it is very dangerous. You're gonna get hurt no matter what. And that's the way, whether it's an agency, administrator, a private individual, any and all that, they perceive that. But if you can explain to them and show them the facts and stuff, show burn records and things like that, the probabilities of spot fires, escapes, and lawsuits and insurance claims are just not there. We've got a lot of that facts that are out there. It makes a lot of people feel a lot more comfortable with using that. And so, yeah, I use it a lot to help people get more comfortable with that fire and to understand that with using it. And it's important. It's important to be forthright with that. With that.
I think it's important to just kind of say that to let people know in ways they can minimize their liability as well. So it depends on the state that you're in, but like a state like Georgia or Florida or Mississippi, where being a certified burner greatly reduces what kind of civil lawsuit can be brought against you, or really tips it to your side. And that's a good thing to do, because you get extra training too as part of that certification process. And then it just gives you that little bit of extra protection. Of course, knowing your neighbors is really important, kind of thinking all the way through what will happen if my fire gets out? What kind of fuel is next to me? What's it going to do when it gets into there? What's, neighbor Joe going to say when that happens, in talking to him before you do the burn, and just really kind of playing the whole scenario out as to what could go wrong and then what would really happen in that situation. Either it'll make you realize, well, that's something we really need to work on, or it'll give you some peace about going ahead and doing the burn.
Morgan, do you have something to add?
Yeah, Marcus, I would just add that there's lots of things that we can do before the burn to mitigate some of that. And Kevin touched on a lot of that too. Communication prior to, good relationships with your first responders, having your VFDs right there on site, because who knows, maybe they might learn something about fire too when they're participating on it. But fire breaks, man, a lot of folks want to skimp on fire breaks sometimes, and that is the best. That's the best defense you could possibly provide yourself. So especially if you're working with a challenging unit, it looks like a 5-prong like Ninja Star or something like that, beef up those fire breaks, or be proactive in the way you manage the brush that comes off that fire break. Think about that probability of ignition on the line, where your weak spot's at, and factor in what you know about ignitions. There's so much art to the science. And I think we can get really creative in how we approach that to minimize that liability, and put all of that in your burn plan, because that's the thought process that you are building and you are walking yourself through. So the planning, the preparation, and just the mental part of preparation before you light that burn. If you're nervous about it, or if it's your first fire, don't be afraid to spend some time and get to know the unit and know the weather and know what those prescriptions are.
Great. We have one question that's come in that was they were interested in the micro burns, what they call them. That's one opportunity to introduce fire and get past the barrier. So let's see, the question is, are there resources out there or information about these micro burns? And they provide an example. One municipality near them is interested in burning in a semi-urban area. And they're concerned about smoke management. And they're wondering if burning at a small enough scale, if you could manage the smoke differently, or maybe it's not a problem at all if you go down to a small scale like that. But mainly, what are the resources available to learn about that? So anyone that wants to address that's fine. Craig, I think they were referencing something you were saying a minute ago.
To answer your question about resources on small scale burning, no, I am not aware of any that are written specific to that. I do believe you could use information from, for example, John's book or others that would apply to small scale burning. But oftentimes you don't read about how you can use a backpack blower, for example, to blow out a fire break around a small area in the woods, or how you can use backpack sprayers to help control that. So there's some nuances there that you might use with burning small areas that you wouldn't necessarily use in burning large areas. But I don't know of any resources, and maybe that's something we need to think about with regard to some extension publications. On a different topic of scale with regard to wildlife, particularly those who are burning for deer, for turkeys, for bobwhite, and there are other species. Cottontails, for example, a lot of people use fire specifically to manage a property for rabbits. Having your scale of burning smaller can help you in a big way with regard to your interspersion of different types of structure, your juxtaposition of food resources adjacent to cover resources, and you can scale that such that you're getting greater use by more animals on a given property than if you're burning the half of the entire property at once and you're rotating it in that fashion. We've seen that multiple times. And then I think the last part of your question was regarding smoke management in suburban or at the urban interface. Then obviously you've got to, there's probably different laws, or you've got to go through some kind of permitting to burn in some of those areas because it's going to be much more difficult. And then, of course, your consideration for wind is critical, such that the wind is not carrying the smoke into a populated area or, roads, et cetera. And we always have to be mindful of that, but that's a critical thing when you're talking about burning in a suburban area. And we do a fair amount of that, and it can get tricky. And that also inhibits you from burning on a lot of days when you could be burning, in more rural areas. I don't know if that really answered your question, but my best shot at it.
Yeah,
I would
go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know of any resources out there because, really, truly the techniques are, whether you're burning 3,000 acres or 3 acres, the techniques are still the same. You're thinking about backfires and creating enough black and doing that. To me, I burned a lot of small plots in my lifetime, and I hate them things. Give me 3,000 acres over 3 acres all day long. But I understand that's the way it is. So it is. You're able to do a lot of stuff with small scale and smaller things. But again, they're really true. There isn't a lot of resources out there on so-called micro burning. It's all, same similar techniques in doing that. Again, that it is one of the best ways to manage smoke is because you are not burning much. so smoke should be limited by the size, because the amount of fuel that you're burning. You still have to, just as everybody said, the wind direction's always the key thing of where you're going to send it and get that done. So, but a lot of times too, you can take those smaller plots and smaller areas and do them under some pretty mild conditions and a lot safer. And again, as people get more comfort and get things going, it's one way to do it. Or if you do have an area where you're a small landowner, man, that's what you're going to have to do. So you just have to adapt and learn. A lot of that becomes you adapt to what you've got and what equipment you've got and what works for you. That's why, one thing in one place doesn't work in another place. And it's also why people have developed being able to work with other equipment a lot better than others.
Thank you. I can add one thing to that. In the wildlife module, there is a reference in there, and I've worked on this issue from a different perspective again than burning at the urban interface, but I also see this as a major barrier to adoption of fire by many private landowners that aren't currently using it. And I've tried to address that directly with research to show value in scaling down. And one of the references in that module was on that very thing. We scaled down all the way to 1/4 of an acre, roughly, scale of burning, and showed a positive magnet effect, if you will, on deer, even at that scale. And then we marketed that when we created the extension products. They were a video version and I think a few magazine articles, but we marketed that as bow range burning, trying to target those people interested in managing for deer, and just trying to cast it in a way that they understood that there's value even at that scale. And since then, I've gotten a lot of feedback on that. It has been very successful in getting folks interested in using fire. And many of those people send me messages even now, that's been a few years back, that they're using fire at a larger scale on their property, which is the reason that I did it to begin with. So I think that's one way that we can really address that barrier. But I did want you to know that some of those resources were available in the wildlife module you completed. So we wanted to transition to talk about the prescribed burn associations and people's interests. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I think because we just still have a couple. There was one more question from.
Oh, I must have overlooked it.
That's okay. And feel free to unmute yourself. But the question, they say, I'm from Haiti and connect to the Ministry of the Environment, Director of Forest and Renewable Energy, about firefighting. And the meteorology we could use, it might be maybe on weather potentially, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question if you want to. Not quite sure what your question is, but I think it's on what weather could be.
Yeah, are there resources?
Apps or resources. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that they could use to predict the spread of wildfire or to aid them in fighting wildfire? Sounds like the question. It's for any of the panelists that want to jump in. Are there any apps or resources that you all use to map out or project fire intensity or fire spread?
I don't think there are any good ones that exist. Some of the people at Tall Timbers are working on the Quick Fire app, but it's not quite ready. But keep an eye on that. It's QUIC Fire. It should be available pretty soon. It's kind of like a simplification of the fire tech map that's been developed at Los Alamos lab out in New Mexico, and it's pretty cool. It's going to be a big jump forward from like programs like Behave that they had in the past that are pretty much worthless, unfortunately. But the main thing is knowing the fuels, knowing what kind of fire behaves in different fuels, and if you know that, and then the weather conditions and the wind directions, you can make a pretty good guess as to what fire is going to do, including when it hits a place that's been recently prescribed burn, for example, or has low fuel, or is wet, or is a fire break, and the like. but that comes from a lot of experience. And it's hard to know how to get that exactly, and not knowing when you look at a fuel load, what it's going to do when it catches on fire. And so, that's a good reason to be a part of a volunteer fire crew or prescribed burn association, or somewhere where you can get a lot of experience seeing fire behave in different fuel types before trying to do it yourself, or talking to an expert and getting their idea about what fire is going to do when it gets into that fuel type.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about experience. My experience seems to be is people that use models to do stuff typically stay in their office and never burn anything. So.
Yeah, honestly, it's usually like a checkbox for agencies to say some model was run, but even the modelers themselves will say, well, we took the model output, we multiplied it times 4 so it would match the actual fire. Stuff like that. So, yeah.
Okay, let's see. Mary now just put one resource in the chat if you're interested in that. So, all right, well, we wanted to transition to talk more about prescribed burn associations and their value, and maybe understand the interest of some of you all and being a part of those, or helping create or facilitate those. But before I do that, I wanted to thank all of our panelists. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Great information. We're happy for you to stick around and be part of the conversation. But we just wanted to let you know that we really appreciate you taking this time. It's been a great discussion. I learned a lot myself. So
I have another meeting to go to, but it was good to see everybody, and best of luck on your burning going forward.
yeah, thanks, Craig. We really appreciate it.
See you, Craig.
All right. So one of the major reasons, or one of the big ideas, I guess, behind this training was to start thinking about the creation and implementation of prescribed burn associations. There's some, we have several people on, some of which have already been engaged, some have not yet, that have been a part or helped create or facilitate prescribed burn associations on here to help us think about that issue. And we really wanted this to be a time for all of us to talk together. So if you have interest in, what is a prescribed burn association? How can you use it? What is the benefit? How can you help to create it if there's not one already in your area? Or maybe how can you get involved in one if there is? This is what we wanted to do in this part of the discussion. So do we want to start by those of you that are here that have been involved in prescribed burn associations? Do you mind providing us a little bit of background about yourself? So I think Sabrina, you're one of those.
Yeah, I can go first. Hi, everybody. I'm Sabrina Clays. I'm a farm bill biologist with Quail Forever, nonprofit conservation organization here in Northwest Louisiana. And I will give a full disclaimer. I just helped start our first PBAs here in Louisiana this year. So it was a really great step forward for Louisiana, but I have little experience, but a lot of beginner experience. So I can kind of tell you how it went starting. But I know a lot of people on this call have started many PBAs across, the Southeast, but that's kind of my background. But I primarily work with private landowners, which is why I saw a lot of lack of fire around here and private landowners that were scared to burn. And so I just tried to put them all in a room and say, we're going to do it together and it'll be okay. So that's kind of how, I guess, my background with PBAs.
Okay. Well, that's very useful information. Starting out, that's where a lot of these folks are probably at with this idea. So will be great insight. Let's see, who else has not introduced himself? Jen, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, I can be part of this. And then we have RT and Jesse, since John and Morgan have already introduced themselves also. Yep. So I'm Jen Fawcett. I work out of North Carolina State University. I work in extension forestry there. And I help to, at a regional level, just if people are interested in forming PBAs, provide them with resources and information on how to start one or put them in contact with people like John and Morgan who have all sorts of experience with PBAs. Jesse can give you some history of that. That's we actually had John come to North Carolina at one point and talk about the PBAs in Oklahoma and their success, and then Jesse started one in North Carolina. So I am also a co-coordinator for the newest PBA in Western North Carolina, the Southern Blue Ridge PBA. So I'm kind of like Sabrina in that way, that it's we literally just started 2 months ago. So but I have several resources for folks wanting to start them.
Great, thanks. Jesse, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Am I coming through okay?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, as Jen said, our PBA kind of started organically, naturally. I think, Jen came down one time to film me doing a burn with some of my neighbors. And, all this started, I asked my mom, I'm a lucky guy. I'm a 4th generation burner in my family. My family has been using fire for 150 years on the farm where I live now. So it was a great thing. But I asked my mom, I said, Mom, how'd you get all this acreage burned every year? How'd you burn 200 acres a year? And she said, it was easy. I said, well, how'd you handle labor? She said, I don't know what you're talking about, labor. We just came together. The neighbors help neighbors. And I went, oh, neighbors helping neighbors. That sounds good. So I invited some of my neighbors over. We live in a fire ecosystem here in the Sandhills of North Carolina. Most everybody's burning. So I invited some neighbors over, and Jen came down one time, was watching this. She said, that's called a prescribed burn association. I said, what, is that right? There's a name for what we're doing? That was just neighbors helping neighbors. And she said, yeah, and there's actually some funding to stand one up. So I said, let's get going. And the rest is history, y'all. And really what I try to do is demystify PBAs. First thing to say is they're not a franchise. This is not a McDonald's. Every PBA is unique. It needs to adjust to what is on the ground, who you have. And in my situation, I had a lot of folks who wanted to use fire. They just didn't know where to start. So it was just that simple. We brought folks together, and now we're up to around 400 landowners who work with us after 5 years. So it's incredibly impressive how many people want to use fire. And just a little brief history of how this started. As Jen said, we went from there to bringing together about 200 landowners to talk about it. And I surveyed those landowners, said, listen, do you want to use fire? I had an 80% favorable response. How many of you are actually using fire? We had a 20%. I said, what is that gap? What are the barriers to that gap and wanting to use fire, not using fire? So as John has mentioned, we came up about 6 or 7 barriers. Barrier number 2 is I don't have an opportunity to get an experience. And barrier number 3, I don't have anybody to help me with a burn. And I said, well, that's easy. We'll take those 2 negatives and turn them into a positive. So now when Jane needs 20 acres burned and Bob and Sue and Bill need to get a drip torch in their hand, it's just that simple. And if someone is there with the confidence to lead that burn and everybody else gets to get some drip time, then it just takes off from there. So I try to keep it simple and keep it organic. Fire is part of the natural landscape here in the Sandhills of North Carolina. So we're not really creating a new wheel here. We're putting back a cultural phenomenon.
Great, thanks. RT,
Thank you. My name is RT Lumpkin. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I got you.
My name is RT Lumpkin. If you see me looking at another screen, it's mirrored and I can see better on one than the other. So I apologize if I'm looking away. I work for the Georgia Forestry Commission. I am the Prescribed Fire Center coordinator. I cut my teeth with fire as an entry-level ranger and then suppressing fire and applying fire for the last 20 years in West Central Georgia. It's something I love to do. I love working with private landowners, and that's who we focus on. And we really focus on addressing, I've heard it numerous times, this is a people business, and gaining that trust and figuring out what landowners need is kind of my goal in life for this particular area. And I enjoy doing it. No one landowner is identical to another, so each one's unique, and we try to find solutions to problems that they have.
Great. Well, I guess I can start out with the questions. Again, for those of you who have interest in getting involved with PBAs and you want to know how to start one or what it entails or anything, feel free to chime in and let us know. We really would love to have people engaged. But I guess to come right out with it, how do you find a PBA if it's in your area? Are there resources available so you can figure out, or is there already that opportunity there, or is it something you're going to need to create? That's for anyone that
I can kick us off there, and I'm not sure actually how many of our participants have gotten to this module in the course yet. So in the course itself, it's one of the later modules. So if you haven't gotten to it yet, that's okay. But as part of that module, you'll see that there's actually a map that is maintained by the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange. And it shows, at least to the county level, where all of the known existing PBAs are across the country. I know there are some missing because they are just popping up so quickly all over the country. And actually, John and I have a conversation lined up with the people who maintain that map tomorrow about trying to make it a little bit more formalized, where people can fill out a form with their information and have it submitted to be added to the map, just because it's getting hard to keep up with all of them. There's more than 100 of them across the country now.
Wow.
But that map, I'll put that map into the chat box, or maybe somebody else can add it into the chat box also, because there is a link to that where people could find that to at least see where the closest one is to you, or if there's already one in your area, or if not, then maybe you might want to consider starting one.
Great, thanks. So another, I guess, an obvious question for me is what is the benefit? Why do we want to have a prescribed burn association? What is the extension agent or the private landowner going to gain from that?
I can take a stab at that, I guess. From my perspective, being a private lands biologist, for us, it was just getting the word out about prescribed fire. It's one of the easy ways to do that, because people are driving down the roads and they see people in Nomex and they think, what are they doing? Lighting things on fire. But then people really start to understand it a little bit more, and people talk. From my perspective, we have these couple people that their friends in other parishes and counties are helping them. And so the word is really spread, for lack of better words, like wildfire. And so that was one really big benefit to us. And then to find more people wanting to do wildlife habitat work as well, from my perspective too. And then the overall benefit, obviously, is to see more prescribed fire out on the landscape, which is what we're ultimately trying to see more of, to really restore these ecosystems that we don't get to see as much as we used to. So that's the overall benefit. But for the private landowner, PBAs provide education and equipment and manpower. Those are the main three things. So if you have the people that come together for the PBA to form, they have the manpower to show up the day of the burn. Equipment, if you have a burn trailer for that PBA, or maybe your state has one. And then the education, if you have some consulting biologists that help, like myself, with my PBA, or your extension agents who can provide the education of prescribed fire in general. So that's what I see it benefit of it.
Yeah, and I see, thank you, appreciate that. See, Zach Prusak also wrote in the chat that it can offer great mentoring opportunities, new burn boss trainees, fire experience for new fire crews, and especially students. So thanks.
It also helps address that the number one thing everybody relates to is liability. When you get people around that are familiar with fire, you're burning in the same geography. So the frequency of fire in that area increases. So the liability should, in theory, decrease some. That's a big component to it as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mary, now?
Hi. Yeah, I don't think there's a PBA in Southeast Georgia yet. And so I am mildly interested in starting one, but I'm wondering like how much work goes into that. And then once you get like a core group, how do you divvy up responsibilities and kind of what the time commitment is starting and then what to ask of people, I guess, how to divvy that up.
I guess I can speak up. I've been around a few of them. There's like Jesse said, and that's a great way to say it. It's not a McDonald's franchise. They're not all the same. Every one of them is different. But I will say this from the experience I've had with them, you have to have some key person that's the spark plug that leads the way, that takes over some kind of leadership role. As for how much work goes into it, it's like any other thing, is what you're going to get out of it, what you put into it. And that's what every member is the same way, where you're going to get out of it, what you put into it. Time commitment, it's going to depend on how you feel like delegating, how people lead, how things do. It's not a full-time job, but people can make it a full-time job, and sometimes people burn themselves out of getting that and doing that. You want it to be comfortable and relaxed. And the ones I see that are more successful, it's a social event. Burning is a social event that brings neighbors together, just like what's been said. They're helping each other out. It's a great social event, and come help and visit, and we get a job done. We get it done safely, we get it done effectively, and then we'll go on. A lot of times if there's, more of a season that people burn into, that's when everybody's going to be the busiest, burning around that time of year. And then after that, it kind of slows down to, a lot of months you don't do anything, don't mention anything, don't even think about the burn association going on and until time to get started again, writing plans and getting things thinking about and doing that. So, it's all different. And I know there's a lot, Jesse can attest to a lot of it, what he does and, how much it all depends on every individual and how many people you have working within that PBA that are willing to step up and help and do different things. And again, figuring out people's roles within that is important. I know a lot of times there's a misconception about PBAs that we're trying to train everybody to be a fire boss, to be their own fire boss. And that's really not what it's about. It's just about everybody helping each other get fire on the ground. Everybody's not a leader, and you don't want everybody to be a fire boss, because everybody's not they don't have the ability to be a fire boss. That's just people. Some people are leaders and some people are followers. And so you want to make sure that you have a few of those good leaders that are willing to lead burns and to do that and to help try to train more. You want to train more and more and get everybody comfortable with doing it, but we're not, it shouldn't be out there. We're trying to make everybody a fire boss. We're just wanting to make sure everybody helps and gets helped and does that. And so some people have a little more of a role than others, and some people are just that. And the nice thing is you can take anybody and everybody to, because I've worked with burn associations. It's got 8-year-old kids out there helping burn. They're riding around, and what better to do is to train up the next generation. Get them comfortable with fire at a young age and doing that. And we've got folks that are over 80 years old that come on every burn. I know one of the burn associations, they got a couple that's in their 80s, and they're at every burn that the burn association does. Granted, what are they going to do? They drive around in their UTV and they haul fuel and they haul water to people to drink. They bring drinking water to everybody, and they bring torch fuel. Man, that's a job, And granted, if something was to happen, they can't get out and fight fire, but they can do what they need to do. And so everybody's got a role. And to do that, and that's a nice thing about them, to get that kind of activity going on.
Yeah, I'll follow up with what John is saying, and I agree 100%. I do think it is, if you have the wherewithal if you can have a person like a coordinator who runs that PBA for you, you will find that to be a very worthwhile endeavor. And there is funding out there. I think more funding is going to be coming online every day. To have in my case, I'm a full-time coordinator of the PBA, and I work 7 days a week, y'all. We get probably 2 landowners a week joining us. It's reached a critical mass where the word is getting out. Everybody wants to be part of it. So here's what I think is the biggest challenge, y'all. So, landowners are on a spectrum. You got some folks like myself who have been burning for 4 generations, and you have some folks who have no idea what a longleaf pine, here, they don't know what a longleaf pine is, never heard of burning. And someone just told them about it. So finding a way to engage that spectrum of landowners with no experience to a lot of experience becomes really what makes that PBA work. And as John was saying, there is a role for everybody. And so now on burns, I always have a mentor. One of the things I did was to bring in a mentor with me on burn. So last night we did a burn, and the mentor was working with the unexperienced people doing exterior lighting. And then I had another crew inside the burn unit doing interior lighting, which needs a little bit more skill set. And when you see those landowners being able to use where they are, because becoming fire wise and getting into fire is an accumulative process for landowners. It's not something they sign up and they're ready to go. They need to start small and move their way up. Someone's already mentioned one of the things that we do is we work with our Forest Service here in North Carolina to stand up certification classes for that landowner to get certified. Does that make them a burn person? No, but it's part of that process where they go, oh, now I'm a certified burner. I have some skill sets. And so you just need to build on those skill sets, that accumulative process where you move them from interest, like I said, 80% interest to using fire action. Building that interest and getting it into action is something you have to carry that individual through one person at a time, which can be very time consuming. So I spend a lot of time one-on-one doing site visits with landowners to help them get ready for burning and understand what it is. And, we'll probably get this in a minute, but let me go ahead and tell you the next workshop I'm doing is going to be entitled Before the Burn. And what I want to do with that type of workshop, I want everyone to understand the success of a burn is determined days, weeks, months in advance of that burn. It's really not the day of that makes that successful burn. And helping people understand how to get ready for a burn, how to get the fire lines in, how to remove any snags or anything that's going to be a problem. Most of the landowners who have been turned off to fire are the ones who do a burn today. What is today? Thursday? They do a burn on Thursday, and for the next 3 days, they're mopping up because they didn't realize they had 100,000-hour fuels that were going to ignite, and now they can't leave their house, and they go, oh, I don't want to do that. So helping people understand how to prepare for a successful burn, what the steps are, and how to mitigate any, really detrimental pieces of burning becomes crucial for that landowner to feel like they see themselves as a burner. So that next workshop is going to be how to, and we've already talked about this, how do you break up? If you have a 100-acre farm or a 50-acre farm, how do you break up your burn units into something that you can handle? And it was mentioned in the last section, those small burns, y'all, we now do most of our burning in the evenings. We'll get together around 3 or 4 in the afternoon and light up around 5. And that makes burning a lot more accessible because most of our landowners, and y'all know this, have full-time jobs. Most of the landowners I work with have other off-farm jobs, and their burning is a weekend or after-work activity. So making sure whatever you're doing is acceptable and doable by those landowners becomes very important. So what I want to do is sit down in this workshop and go over where to put your fire breaks, why to put them there, how to divide up your land so that each prescription is separate. And, I can go into details, but that's a big thing we're learning. If you have different prescriptions on your farm, you want to break those up. You don't want them in the same unit because something's going to go wrong, and that's going to turn that landowner off. So helping them figure out how to have a successful burn is that accumulative process where they develop those skills, they have an understanding, and they know how to put the fire on the ground in a way that is safe to them. One of the successes about the PBA here in the Sandhills of North Carolina is that we work closely with a partnership, and in that partnership is everybody from Department of Defense to the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife. And so the PBA becomes the private landowner outreach arm of all those agencies, because here in the Sandhills, everything is owned by private lands, but our agencies didn't have a good way to reach out to those landowners. It's hard to spend the one-on-one time with them that they require. So that's what the PBA has been able to do. Even with the Forest Service, they were able to do the classroom training, but they weren't able to supervise those on-the-ground burns. So that's what the PBA does. The Forest Service will put on the class for us. Then we go out and work with those landowners to do their burn to complete their certification. The PBA becomes a helper to the state and federal agencies who are trying to do private landowner engagement as well.
Yeah, great. Alan, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Alan. Jesse, you were actually touching on all the points I was going to ask a question about. I work in Region 6 up in Oregon for the U.S. Forest Service in suppression and have for a number of years. And you're all in a completely different field type and in a completely different area, but I know that you do burn quite a bit down there. And just learning a little bit more about your PBAs, it seems like you guys are extremely involved on a very local and community base, where we tend to function on a much larger agency basis. And the crossover interactions that we have with the general population is pretty limited unless there's an actual wildland fire. So that's where our point of entry to get the general communities to be better involved in fire is really restricting. And I'm hearing, and it seems like the agency is good at administering maybe the technology or the classes, Jesse, that you were mentioning, to help give them some strong background information education. But how are ways that I can go back to the Forest Service in our area and start creating a way to overlap and help create PBAs in our regions? And the reason I'm saying that is, well, you may not be familiar, but for us in Region 6 and in the West, the minute you mention a prescribed burn, the first thing that comes out is, I'm sure it's going to escape, or they've lost another burn. So it becomes a very difficult culture to overcome. But I'm seeing, and we tend to see a lot of interest at some level for people to get involved and have ownership of fire. So I was just wondering if there are ways that you guys can think of that I can get agency folks to get our general population involved a little bit more.
I can answer to that or a little bit. We've had some experience. Some of our PBAs have had some different experiences, not specifically with Forest Service, but with Fish and Wildlife. Actually, probably one of them has with Forest Service, one of the national grasslands out in western Oklahoma. But Fish and Wildlife, one of the refuges, we have PBA that neighbors with the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. And they started working together really well. Again, there's some things about, they couldn't come help the PBA burn, and the PBA members couldn't come on the refuge. But they started, what it did was it opened up a dialogue between each other. And so whenever each other was going to burn, they would talk to each other prior to that. And the refuge a lot of times would say, all right, we're going to burn this area. And the local ranchers would say, great, then bring your fire across the fence. We'll take it as soon as it crosses the fence. We'll just plan on burning it together. And so they would link burns up and allow it to burn across property boundaries with no problems. We have the same thing going on with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers here in Oklahoma in the Tulsa district. They do the same thing with landowners and some of the PBAs around some of the lake properties and stuff that they own and manage, where they can't specifically go help, but they can work together and plan burns together where there's no there's no fence line, and we allow that fire to freely move across those property boundaries and doing that. So that's one of the good things about having those PBAs in there is working those kind of things. Again, makes fire safer for both sides. Again, you reduce that liability by not having to worry about property boundaries. fences are the number one reason why most people don't burn. And it's not the physical fence, it's the thought of that fence and that fire getting on the other side of it. And that puts that fear in. And that's what hopefully the PBAs do, is get people talking more about fire, neighbors talking about fire. And that neighbor doesn't have to be another private landowner. It can be an agency, NGO, or whatever. And that's the key to that. And it's the key to reducing the risk, reducing the liability, and making fire function more freely across the landscape by reducing that. And so, it can work with those kind of situations.
I don't know if any of you know Jamie Sal from East Texas, but he's with the U.S. Forest Service on the eastern side, and they probably burn a majority of the acres in East Texas. And he, in one of his presentations, he talked about, yes, he is in his uniform, but he makes it a point to go to coffee every morning at the cafe. And that's where he talks with ranchers, with landowners. And he's just another member of the community there. So yes, he has a job, and yes, he has a role in the fire culture, but he still is bought into this community culture of prescribed fire. And he understands the importance of being just kind of one of them. He's not necessarily associated with it from an agency perspective, but he takes a lot of pride in just being a community member and talking to them on their level over coffee at the cafe. And so I think that's pretty important for local relationships, and it really goes a long ways to build that relationship before the fire, and then because you still got that relationship after the fire or during the fire, or especially if there's an incident within an incident.
One thing I've found extremely helpful is these relationships allow you to see multiple landscapes and different age classes of timber or grasslands or cutovers or whatever the case may be. And there are multiple of those as you grow that allow you what something is going to look like. So when you have a landowner on the fence about something, you can say, oh, well, 2 miles from here, there is an example of what I think your property should look like. And you could talk to that landowner and develop that relationship and figure out what they did to get there, what lessons they learned. And it really helps foster the whole concept and lets a landowner that is on the fence about any particular issue see examples, and you can carry them to the next stage. Well, this is 5 years from now, this is 10 years from now, this is 50 years from now. And you can help new landowners see that process and understand how long it takes to get there and the amount of effort it takes. And PBAs are a real good way of kind of getting people to jump on board and see what those next steps are. And really helpful in that aspect.
One thing I wanted to ask is how many people do you need before you can get the PBA established? Is it just having one person who's willing to lead it, or do you need a critical mass? And then I think someone addressed it, but along those same lines, is once you do reach that critical mass, have you all experienced a situation where people start hearing from it and then you sort of open the floodgates and people keep contacting, trying to get involved? Or how has that developed with some of you that have experience with it?
I can jump in on that. And I was talking with somebody from North Florida that we helped them stand up a PBA, and they have the same problem we have now. It's a great problem to have. We have been so successful now that we will have sometimes, 6-8 burns on the board for a single day. So now what you do when you have that many burns going on, how do you handle that? And so really the strategy that I use for landowners is, you tell me what your prescription is, all the folks who want to burn, and they'll come up because they need a prescription. They didn't know why they're burning and what they're burning and how they want to burn it. And then we look for weather, and we'll say to the folks, when your prescription lands on your land, then you'll be in the queue to go forward. But I should say right here, one of the goals of the Sandhills PBA, and I think it should be all our goals, is to create independent burners. So now, you know, we have some landowners who've been burning with us for 3 or 4 years, and they're out there burning on their own now. So any given day, we could have 3, 4, 5 burns happening at the same time when that burn window pops. That it makes you nervous. It makes me very nervous, but so far it's gone very well. But yes, you can get so successful that you can have a lot of folks wanting to put fire on the landscape on the same day when that window hits. And that is where you want to make sure you have spent time with those landowners and they feel very confident before they go out on a limb and do something like that. But yeah, that's where we're all headed, to where we want to get a lot of folks burning, and we just need to be prepared to do it. And the way the North Florida folks and the Sandhills PBA are doing it is that we have that prescription. And if you land on that prescription, then I'll send you out, you know, to the PBA. We use email, just to go into a little detail. You know, like I said, we have about 400 landowners. And if Sue wants to burn on Thursday in one county, and we work in 7 counties, it's 2 hours between one end of our work area and the other. And what we find now is when we have 3 or 4 burns on the same day, what you'll see is folks in that immediate vicinity of that burn will congregate on that one. So you'll have several burns going on, and different people will go to the burn closest to them to get that training, so they don't have to go very far. But it's a good problem to have, but it's one that you need to anticipate how to stack your burns when you start having multiple burns pop up on the same day, and get ready for it, because it really is challenging, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, and our example, and I think that's what you want the PBAs to be. I've had several, and so we've had PBAs that they start to gather enough equipment so they can do more than one burn at a time. So you'll have enough crews and people going out and doing that. Also, we've had PBAs. We had one this year that split. They split in the east and west side of the county, and because the east side folks didn't want to go to the west side, and the west side, they were doing that, and they're all doing their thing, and you got enough equipment, you got enough experience. So that's a lot of times what you may do is with a PBA, you may take a larger area, and then what you're hoping for is to start developing multiple burn associations out of that one over time, where you're going to get core people in all of those areas. And that should be one of the goals, is to try to do that and, get plenty of equipment, plenty of experienced people out there to do that. And so again, we can get more fire on the ground, because again, liability is always the limiting factor to get people to burn. But then once you start getting people burning, weather is the limiting factor on burn days, if you look at all that. And so when we have a good burn day, there's going to be a lot more smoke in the air, and there's more people wanting to burn. So that's going to be a goal, and that's hopefully one of those days. Is what you hope is that we start to split this thing up into a lot of smaller burn associations, and everybody just keeps going from there within that.
Great. So we have
I just had a quick comment about kind of, I guess, downsizing from Jesse and John's PBA associations. With starting one out, we found that having a good group of 5 to 10 people that are really interested in burning, that we could sit down and I'm not sure if everybody has bylaws or doesn't, but the ones that we've started here have just a small list of bylaws saying, what they're going to be doing, how many officers they're going to hold as positions, that kind of thing. And so we found it pretty successful to have just a president, a secretary, and a treasurer, one to keep a membership, kind of deal. And that secretary is really helpful for us. So when we do have burns come up and we are looking at the weather and we say, yep, that's the day that we're going to go, that secretary has been really helpful to send out to our membership, even if it's, only, 50 to 100 people, to send that out to those folks. And then we've also used an app, GroupMe app. We have a small enough group at this point that it's still usable to put people in there, and everybody's on their phones sometimes rather than their emails, even though it's on our phones. But that seems to work really well to be able to connect everybody together and say, here's the address, and it's very quick and easy. But having a good group of 5 to 10 people to really sign have a final draft of bylaws that's been helpful for us. And then to at least have that president, treasurer, and a secretary. And then to have your consulting advisors. That's what we call them, consulting advisors. So like I'm a consulting advisor. We have 2 other ones on our PBA to basically facilitate for the time being to help write those burn plans for everybody, and to be there on the burn as educators, to say, can you go light a backfire? Can you go light, a flank fire, something to that effect? Because a lot of, at least in our case, ours are very new at burning. We have 2 PBAs in the state. One has a little bit more experience. We have some retired foresters and firefighters that are very comfortable with prescribed fire. The one that I work with primarily, they are still a little trepidatious of fire. And so it takes a little bit more hand-holding the day of the burn to go through there and really take it slow and step by step, which is good for us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Agency folks need to be there. They're the technical advisors, the leaders, either that or coordinator standpoint. We do both here in Oklahoma with our burn associations. And again, also we have some good private landowners that are just really good burners and that lead with what they can. But yeah, you hit that right on the head with how you get those people, keeping it simple, keeping that organization simple, because a lot of times people just don't want to be involved in something that's big. But you do need to set up some type of guidelines for the use of equipment and for the burns, guidelines, saying that, all burns will have a written fire plan, will have adequate fire breaks, a minimum number of people on each burn to say, consider it a PBA burn, just some type of minimum guidelines to keep people from kind of going a little bit rogue, and just saying, well, I'm a member and I want the equipment and I'm going to go burn. And then, they cause some problems for the whole group in general. And so that's important to have that. And anymore, if you're going to set up as an organization to within, have a bank account and do that kind of stuff, you've got to have a set of bylaws and stuff so you can get a bank account, so you can get a federal ID number, so you can have that number. It's not like it used to be where you just walked in the bank and said, hey, we're starting the Joe Blow Burn Association here, and we want to get a checking account set up so we can get our dues deposited in here and do whatever we need to do. You gotta have a few things anymore. So they don't want us laundering money. So
I'll just add on to that just a little bit too. Yeah, because going back to like one of the first comments about every PBA is different, and it's not a franchise. I think so. Some PBAs are a lot more formal and have those bylaws and formal membership, and you have to do X, Y, and Z to be a member, and there's dues. And then some of them are just an email list and a Facebook group, and that's it. And so I think really the question of how many people does it take is really going to be dependent on how much, how many counties are you going to be covering, how much land are you covering, how many landowners in your area are interested. And but I think to Sabrina's point, having at least a handful of folks so that you don't have to do the heavy lift, all by yourself. And we actually, as part of our newer Western North Carolina PBA, have a sign-up sheet where we ask a question on there. What skills do you have that you're willing to share with the PBA? Because, there's some folks like myself who we have access to classroom space or online online webinar training or various things, and then but other people they might be that 80-year-old on the UTV that wants to deliver water to people. So I think it just really depends, but I think there is a role for everybody. So I think Jesse has 400 plus people on his mailing list at this point, and it I think it's just dependent on every PBU is a little bit different, going back to that point.
So we have a question of what is the difference between a fire council and a PBA? So does someone want to go into the details about the differences between the two?
Typically a fire council is the agencies, groups within a state region that utilize, promote, and use prescribed fire. It's their way, they're sounding their organization for doing that. A PBA is where you get a group of landowners gathered together, and again, it may be associated with an agency's group or NGOs, and to actively apply fire on the land. And that's what they are. PBAs can be a member of a fire council. Fire councils can support PBAs, but that's what they are. So I think about it as most of the time as a council is the folks that are promoting fire within that state or region, all the people that use it within doing that. And then the PBA is the people applying it on the ground, especially as a private landowner groups and things that we've got. And I guess I see that got a next question there about the liability about PBAs is handled. And that's always a question that people have about doing that. Again, with all the PBAs I work with, and Jesse and others can chime in too as they do. Again, the landowner is still the recipient of the benefit. And so the liability still rests within the handle of that. The PBA is not a contract burn organization or anything like that. They're just a group that brings people together for the education, training, and equipment for prescribed fire. The landowner is the one receiving the benefit of the action, and it's still their fire within doing that. As with the liability, a PBA can be named in a lawsuit. Anybody can be named in a lawsuit. That's just all part of life. With anything we do, we can be named at the lawsuits within that. But the one receiving the benefit of the action, it's their fire. And that's what most PBAs, tell people that, and when doing that, because also, again, most private landowners, their farm ranch liability policies can cover damages from escape fires. So again, that's where that gets it within that. But again, you're managing that risk and that liability by being a member of the PBA, by having adequate people there, adequate labor, equipment, and doing risk management that way to manage that risk and the liability within that. So within that, anybody else?
Is there, just to follow up on that, is there inherent liability just with having people on your property to do this? So just having people join in to come on your property?
Again, most people have insurance on that. It's no different, again, it is no different than any other activity that landowners would have others, branding cattle, helping each other work, having things that are activities of doing that, inviting somebody over to fish allowing somebody to fish on your property or to hunt. Again, there's always that, but again, it's the risk. And, I've never yet to see anybody ever have any kind of problem with any of that. Again, with all the burn associations and burnings that I've done on private lands and with burn associations and stuff, I've just never seen that kind of problem. Usually a lot of times if you start to see somebody that questions that a whole lot within a burn association, they're not going to burn anyway. They have a greater concern about the liability and the risk, and they'll never burn anyway to begin with.
So I'm going to jump in right there. I agree with John 100%. Part of what our PBA does is we have a protocol for burning. We have a checklist. Every burn to us, I want to jump in right here and say every burn that the Sandhills PBA does is a learning burn. And what I mean by that, we do a pre-briefing. We developed a checklist, what you should be doing a month in advance, week in advance, day of, day after. And every landowner has that checklist. And we literally go through that checklist advance of doing the burn. And when I reached out to our Secretary of Insurance here in North Carolina, she said, that's the way you handle risk. You mitigate the liability. And that's what will stand up for you in your defense. Did you have, we literally go through this checklist. Do you have adequate fire breaks? Have you notified X, Y, and Z? We tested the equipment. We have done everything we can, and there's a group of people standing around participating in this. So we're all witness to the fact that this person is not reckless in their burning. They are actually following good practices. So that's good for the landowner to understand how to conduct a burn. And it turns out being that's the best way to mitigate liability is showing that you did due diligence to try to cover every topic. And if something natural happens, like a front moves through while you're burning and you lose the fire, then you can say, we checked weather and we stand right there. We pull out our kestrels, we check the weather, spot weather forecast. The person has the prescription. Are you in your prescription? And many times, y'all, we'll stand there and the person will be out of prescription, usually on an RH. And we will stand around and talk and wait for that RH for that track we're going to burn to come into prescription. And that what that shows is there is a protocol for handling fire and how to make it safe. And it just turns out so well that it actually is a good teaching process for the landowner to help them feel comfortable when they see we're not willy-nilly doing this. We're not just sticking our finger up in the wind and saying, let's burn today. There is a lot that goes into it, and you need to map it out in a way that's understandable. So that's what we did. We actually put it on a sheet of paper that I can, Jen has, but I can send it out to anybody who wants it. And that's a very effective, because if you're seeing a brand new landowner like last night, standing there thinking, did I do X? Did I do Y? Do I do Z? We don't do that. We have it on a sheet of paper and we start every burn by going through that. So everyone understands we've done all that we needed to do, be ready to light up.
Yeah, that's a great example of, again, why we do not see with properly conducted prescribed burns, when we plan it out, we don't see there's not any of these multi-million-dollar lawsuits, big time escapes, and all that, trying to document all that by doing that. That's the key to all of it. And yeah, we do too, Jesse. Every burn, all of our coordinators that work for the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association with all that, every time they help with a burn, it's a training burn. Every burn's a training burn because everybody's learning, and so we mark those down as training events every time.
Right. So before we wrap up here, I had one final thing that I wanted to pose to everybody. For those that have an active and a lot of experience with these prescribed burn associations, if there's someone in here who's interested in starting their own and understanding that, is it okay for them to reach out to you to try to get involved in your own, to understand that process better and get hands-on experience with the PBA process? Great.
Yeah, anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'll be glad to help out, send information, do whatever we can do within that.
Yeah, another thing go ahead, Jesse.
Real quick, are there any PBAs in Virginia?
I just got that phone call that
okay, I sent you somebody yesterday.
yeah, I told him he would need to be the one to start one because I'm not aware of any up there yet.
That's how quick, y'all. I got a call from a guy who has some land he wanted burned. He said, I heard you have a PBA. How do you start one? And I said, well, call your neighbors.
Yeah.
That's what he said he was going to do. He's going to start calling his neighbors. See if anybody want to come over and help him burn. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to mention, that website that that I had put into the chat earlier, I can put it in there again if folks need it, but I would love to be able to include, that template that Jesse just talked about with the checklist or some of the bylaws that folks have created. There's no sense in recreating the wheel for a lot of this stuff. It's already been done, a lot of it. And so I think having a place where we can share those things among ourselves and see what other people are doing. So I think it was TJ had asked about, is there data being collected on this? And John actually has a form for PBAs to fill out, how much burning are you doing? And he's collecting that information about to try to capture how much burning our PBA is doing. And so I think having, being able to share all of that among ourselves is going to be critical, because some of these questions we're asking, let's share this among all the other PBAs too. So that's one of my goals.
One quick note on that for the burn form, I put up it's ok-pba.org. That's our website for the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association. We're an umbrella organization for all the PBAs in Oklahoma. We now have 24 PBAs in Oklahoma. We started a new one night before last as well. And we work to get money and funding for all of our PBAs. We also hire coordinators that work and help a lot of the PBAs that need help and doing that. But we've got a lot of the stuff on bylaws, different guidelines and stuff that are there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So there's templates of stat stuff and information. There's also that form. But real quick, the burn entry form, I'm going through the data right now. And we started it in 2015. And of all the PBA entries that I've got, 336,000 acres on 1,054 burns since 2015 to 2021. That's just PBA burns that were listed. So that's a nice, it still ain't near enough. We ain't burning near enough, and it's great to see that kind of activity and doing that. And so doing that, I think that was with like 50 something PBAs reporting 54 or something like that. So.
Yeah, so that's only half the PBAs in existence. So I don't know how to, so if we can get the word out to everybody, that would be great to show the kind of impact.
Yeah, I think probably I bet half of them have been formed in the last year. California's got 13 now, and probably more than that since I last talked with Lenya and them. But, they're really getting after it, doing that. They just keep growing, and it's great to see that kind of activity go along. So been quick here in the last several years since formed the first one back in 1997. So.
Hey, before we wrap up, something we haven't touched on that I think is the real beauty of the PBA and is the currency of the PBA, if I can use that term, and that is peer-based learning. There's so much learning that an agency can impart to a landowner, but when one landowner looks over at another landowner's tractor and said, "How'd you get that sprayer to work on a toggle switch?" And like on my pickup truck right now, going to the burn tonight, I have all my drip torches in a chicken crate that one of our landowners saw me, messing with my drip torch, says, "Listen, I've got a old chicken crate in my barn that I think would fit for those." And everybody saw that and said, "How many more of those chicken crates?" So a lot of people are carrying their drip torches. And I know it's kind of a funny statement, but really, y'all, when landowners look over and they see people who look like them conducting a burn and have similar backgrounds, that is the green light that they are looking for. Peer-based learning is the currency of PBAs, and it is magical. When I'm out on a burn, and we show up at Joe's house with 15 or 20 people, and that's how many people we have per burn now. It's getting pretty unruly. We can't even announce all our burns. But when this landowner sees 15 or 20 people they've never met before in their life, and they go through a fire together on their land, you now have a set group of people who look at each other differently. And if I had to say what the greatest value of a PBA is, it's that right there. People coming together and seeing that they have common interest.
Yeah. And they start to manage their land so much better, because a lot of times what we've seen is they're managing for more fuel. So their burns are better and people don't laugh at them. It's that kind of deal of like, we got that. Who's got the best fire breaks? Probably the biggest one is a lot of them, who feeds the best. It gets to be a contest on who has the best meal after the burn, and it's like, oh yeah, we're going to go help at this place because, man, they feed good. So, that kind of
Gamify.
stuff. It's kind of funny.
All right. Well, does anyone have any final thoughts before we conclude?
I would add, don't be afraid. Just do it. Keep it simple. And the more you do it, the more you learn, the more you grow, and the more people will come. And it's just like a branding. People will gather, and the community and the culture will take care of itself. And all it needs is literally someone to take that first step. And I think everybody in this room and on this call have served in that capacity at some level. So if you need anything, don't be shy. I'm here, and I know John is the best source too to bugs. So don't just do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. We really appreciate all the expertise and everybody wanting to share that with us. Thanks everybody who took the course. We really appreciate it and all the feedback that you've given. We hope that you learned a lot. I think this has been really valuable, and I can't thank you all enough for giving your time to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining.
Pizza at Morgan's office.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, on those windy days, the office is sometimes okay too.
That's right.
Good to see you, John.
Yeah, see y'all, everybody.
Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.